Okay. Call the work session to order. Our topic for this evening is real estate personal property tax exemptions for nonprofit organizations, etc. Ms. Bradley.
Yes.
Good.
A meeting or two ago, the subject came up about, the tax exemptions that were coming before the board, and there was a general feeling that they were coming more often. And, so we were asked to do a little research on it, and, I emailed on Friday afternoon sort of the results of what I was able to find out. The main
And
thing.
that's incorporated in what we were given here, right?
Yes, sir, that
Okay.
is an exact copy of what was emailed.
Okay, good deal.
But the main thing that I found out was that in chapter 36 of the Virginia Code, section 58.1, which has to do with taxation, the state has established a number of classifications of property. By classifications, we're talking about sort of large sections of different kinds of property, for instance, churches, cemeteries, public libraries, that the state has already determined must be exempt from local property taxes.
And those are all in the Constitution, aren't they? That first category.
Well, they're listed like that in the 3606
Okay.
code section.
Right.
But in addition to those particular classifications, they come back in the next code section, 3607, and like specifically name certain organizations. And so those are called exemptions by designation.
But they
But they're
carry the
also-
same weight. I mean,
Yeah.
Yes.
we have no discretion in
That's
either
right.
category,
That's right.
was how I read this, okay.
And then there's even a later addition to the code, that's sections 3609 through 3622, where the state again names sort of larger categories by classification, things like volunteer fire and rescue service agencies, boys and girls clubs, societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals, Boy and Girl Scout clubs, and those are listed in that second section of my memo. So it wasn't until January 1st of 2003 that it became possible for local governing bodies to exempt certain nonprofits. And so this is provided in code section 3651. And in that code section, it lays out basically the procedures that a local board would need to go through, which involve a public hearing. And the public hearing has to be held at least 5 days before the board, the publication of the public hearing has to be 5 days before the actual public hearing. The ordinance can be voted on at that time, but basically it gives the local governing bodies some discretion to give tax exempt status to nonprofits. It also lays out a certain list of questions that it says the local governing body should ask itself as they're considering whether to give the exemption. And they include things like, is it a 501c3? Do they have a current ABC license? What kind of compensation is being paid to its directors? You know, is it in excess of what you would reasonably think would be paid? How much of the net earnings inure to the benefit of an individual, and if a significant portion of their revenues are from grants or donations and things like that. So it does lay out the types of things that the local governing body should consider, but it leaves it up to the local governing body whether to exempt these nonprofits or not. But the only ones we're talking about, of course, are nonprofits that don't fit into any of those classifications or designated entities already exempted by the state. So in looking at Orange, it seems like we have very few exemptions that have actually been granted under 3651. I looked at the 2019 real estate land book with Renee's help and found 5 entities that it looks like are receiving tax exempt status under that code section, and I attached a list of those for you. But it looks like, we didn't have our first, or at least if there were any exempted prior to 2009, they're no longer on the list. So the first ones that we have that are active were first exempted in 2009. And that was the Central Virginia Battlefield Incorporated and the Orange Historical Society. Also the Arts Center in Orange. And then since that time, we've also exempted the Peter Stephan Foundation and the Love Outreach Food Pantry.
Was the Paul Stephan done by the board?
Yes,
It's fairly recently.
and that was in 2015.
2015.
And so most of the exemptions have been done for both real and personal property. The state's code sections apply to real and personal property, but in recent times, we have done a couple just for personal property, especially the one most recently for the adaptive water sports, Lake of the Woods adaptive water sports. That was for personal property up to a maximum of $1,000 a year. The Paul Stephan Foundation is also getting that personal property exemption. The Lake of the Woods Line Club and the Love Outreach Food Pantry. But there were no values listed there on the personal property book. It's required for the real estate book for there to be a value and an amount of tax that's being exempted, but it's not for the personal property.
In terms of the 3606 and 3607 exemptions, those don't even come to the board. Is that right? Is that something that
That seems to
Commissioner
be the case.
has been doing?
That seems to be the case in the places that I was able to talk to. I talked to a couple of different localities about their process, and even in Orange County, it seems that typically 3606 and 7, would not come to the board.
There's no
because-
decision by the board anyway.
Right.
Well, but my question is, if you include land, building, personal property, it seems to me that there ought to be at least some check that says, just because they own the 500 acres behind the, whatever it is, I mean, is that really being used? And let's say they rented it out to some farmer to grow hemp, just to be.
Right. Well, there is a little more, in the code sections, there's a little more detail, like, it seems to really come down to the use, so, like,
That's
when
why
it
I
comes to
picked hemp.
churches, it talks about, it can be a parking lot, it can be like a picnic pavilion area, it can, what were some,
And.
it can be a parsonage.
But I guess
and
my
other
question is,
ancillary uses.
But if a church owns an apartment building, that's not
No,
exempt.
right.
but when it comes to the commissioner to make that decision, I know she's back there. You're hiding from me, I don't blame you, I've already talked to you 6 times. I mean, do you get enough information to sort through those quote automatic approvals, or do you just have to take their word for it and go with it?
Right, we take their word for it. We've never gotten any paperwork as long as.
I mean, I don't know that there's a problem, I'm not suggesting there is, it's just that this, if we're looking at this process, I don't know whether we should just jump over 3606 and 7 stuff and worry about the other, or not, I don't.
And that was sort of one of the considerations that I thought, we needed to think about, because one of the places that I looked at, Loudoun County actually has somebody, that's dedicated to just implementing this, but they have an application that comes in that, anybody applying for exempt status has to fill out the application. But if they meet one of those, state-approved things, it stops there. But they still have to, provide some documentation in order to convince the commissioner that yes, it is indeed a church, or indeed it is property that's being used for a legitimate charitable, purpose.
Have you ever had any come in that you had questioned whether they were valid or not?
Yes, we have.
Okay.
And what was the results with those?
Well, we had one that a church had bought a piece of land that we weren't sure if they were using it for church purposes per
Right.
se. So, but we did confirm that through the deed, that it was for the church, for church use.
So if we had a process, we would probably be using reams of paper to confirm that we're wasting time and money, even bothering with those two sections.
Yeah.
The only thing is that in my experience with anything like this, is that over time, smart people figure out that there's a loophole there to be exploited.
If I may,
And that's my concern here. It's not that the, Antioch Baptist Church is gonna buy 5 acres and pull the wool over our eyes. But there are, as we get up into more and more and more, money that, and this most recent one, I think it was $750,000 building. So that's what kind of starts to make me nervous, is where does this all end?
I was gonna say, there's an example in Powhatan County. 2,000 acres is owned by a convent. There are 9 nuns left living there on the 2,000 acres. But they convinced the Commissioner of Revenue there that they contemplatively walk on all 2,000 acres. And therefore, all 2,000 are exempt as ministry. So that's a creative approach that Mr. Johnson is talking about. And they literally have exempted all 2,000 acres.
This is where?
Powhatan. Because they contemplatively walk the two. And I don't even know that these ladies could walk
Well, that's.
that far, but
Well, I guess that,
Contemplatively hobble.
I share Mark's concern. I mean, it's one thing to have the state code categorically exempt, but it's something entirely different to also put it on automatic, automatic approval. I mean, there seems to me that, and I'm with you, Jim, I don't wanna create a lot of work on reams of paper with no, but it seems to me that we should be, if we're gonna put things on automatic, we should do it with our eyes open.
We should at least have a single piece of paper which we can go back to, and if we hear of something that doesn't sound about right, we can go back and look at that single piece of paper and say, okay, was that addressed on here? Is that what we were told?
I had conversations with counterparts in Isle of White County at the VACO General Assembly Day about this very issue. And the Isle of White Board found itself where they were granting things, and people in the community would ask them, what did you vet this? Did you document anything? And they initially didn't have a real good answer. And so they started this process of exactly kind of vetting and documenting, so that if somebody had a question, then you could readily go back and say, yes, we looked at it and made sure what they were being exempted from.
I guess that's a question, and maybe a question for the county attorney. Even though there's a specific exemption, categorical exemption, my word, not, that's granted by the state, can we not have some control over either procedures or filings or something?
it wouldn't hurt, and it'd obviously be in conjunction with the Commissioner's office, but it probably wouldn't hurt to have an application process to try and catch some of these potential gamers of the system. I know Chesterfield County had a lot of problems with this, and they have an application that's relatively detailed to try and kind of drill down to figure out what it exactly is that you're doing, and are you trying to game the system? So maybe, we could work on a process.
I mean, I guess my question would be to the commissioner, I mean, does this sound like a lot of extra work with no payoff to you, or is it something that have concerns about, or where do you come down at the moment? I mean, tonight, all we're gonna do is talk about this, we're not gonna do anything, so.
To me, it's not a big issue, but I understand where you're coming from as far as checking things that we're automatically carrying over. I get that. I don't feel right about questioning churches and things. That
Yeah.
makes me a little uncomfortable, but.
Sure.
Some of the other things I get, yeah.
Well, would a Buddhist temple be exempt? Because Buddhism is not a religion. It's a lifestyle.
Religion.
Now, it's a lifestyle. If you look up their definition, they are a lifestyle. They are not technically a religion. I'm
This
just,
is what we want the
and
commission to do.
that's why I'm saying this.
Right.
Is we could have, God forbid, the Church of Jim Crozier, you know. It's- I know, and that's what I'm saying is, just because somebody says they are something, what checks are there to?
Well, the IRS, I mean, if you don't, a church doesn't have to apply for a 501c3 with the IRS. They are automatically exempt. However, the IRS does have a checklist of things that they consider hallmarks of a church, and if you don't have these, you could wind up to challenge down the road. So, you know, maybe we attach that list as part of an application, that, you know, these are the things the IRS looks at to make sure you're a bona fide church.
How do people apply for an exemption now? Just a letter?
I mean, as far as these things on here go, they're automatic through us. As far as the ones that go before you all, yes, they go to county administration.
When you say automatic, if the property is owned by some church, then that's all, you take that information off the deed or whatever, and it's, or the property card, and that's
As
that.
long as it's being used for church purposes, yes.
How
Well, what
about,
about if like some, not a church, because that's, that kind of, but what if some organization that fits one of these buys, property in Orange County? You all wouldn't automatically necessarily pick up that that's one of those, they would have to, wouldn't they have to request something?
They would have to request an exemption, yes.
And they do that by writing you a letter or?
To the board, yes.
how do you, for homeowners associations, how do you go through those and determine the exemptions versus the parts that aren't?
Those are in the deeds, like, I know, like, the Lake of the Woods, we had a question about that not too long ago, I think,
Well,
Yeah.
if it's cost center, where they're making money on it, that's not an exempt property, correct?
I think by state code,
All common areas are exempt.
Common areas, but aren't the cost centers?
It's still part of the common areas.
Yeah, I think it's a loophole. I do think they get away with,
You mean someone's exploiting a loophole?
yeah, Lake of the Woods, I think.
It's a big lake, no.
I mean, I'm just, you know, again, I'll take,
How can you be exempt and sell for a
I'll do it
profit?
later.
I'm sorry, sir, when you're, I don't
well,
understand.
they could be making a profit on the clubhouse, I mean, so it's the same.
They
it's
are
a-
making.
Here's the
profit.
logic.
That's not what I hear.
No, they're not. They're losing money on the
But even if
clubhouse.
they did, it's still a.
Here's the logic. If I
It's
explain the
not a
logic, maybe it'll
nonprofit.
make.
I don't think it's a nonprofit, it's common area and it's reflected in
In the
Yeah.
in
individual,
each
Yeah,
individual
that-
house.
That's right.
What the court has said that the law means, and I think it makes some sense, is Lake of the Woods, the common areas, the programs they have, the clubhouse, all of that adds to the value of the individual lots. And the value of those lots reflects the total value of Lake of the Woods, and therefore it's captured.
and that's why we get taxed.
And this is
for it.
all through the state legislature.
It's all through state
Okay, so that
legislature.
explains it. That's, yeah, okay.
But if, you know, if Lake of the Woods decided they were gonna open a grocery store,
Outside of the lake.
no, inside the lake, if they were gonna open a grocery store, how would that be handled? Would they charge sales tax?
They would have to charge sales tax, and in that case, I think you stepped outside of the normal things that a homeowners association may operate and may do. That I think would be a
I
little
mean,
bit
if we were
different.
operating that restaurant as a commercial restaurant, I would think that could pose a problem for their exemption.
Yeah, I would say that's the same as even for churches. If a church runs a business, you know, the church can own the business, but it's a separate business income, and they're not exempt from paying sales taxes and potentially have to.
Sales tax and meals tax.
You'll
Meals,
see
sales.
churches sometimes running thrift stores, and that thrift store then would
Well, and for them, the IRS has certain thresholds of once their revenue exceeds a certain percentage of their total revenue is coming from what are for-profit centers, the IRS forces them to either spin them off or pay taxes.
One other thing, situation that I'm familiar with and seen happen is where a church, maybe that's not located in Orange County or a nonprofit, is willed, bequeathed by an estate, a property and things. So they've come in ownership, and I've seen, not here, where they've requested tax exemption for that lot property that the church is not even in the locality. And so those are the things that may come up. The frequency of the stuff is remote.
My concern that, you know, because I'll take the responsibility for us sitting here talking about this because of my comments at the earlier meeting. I would just like there to be consistency. I would like there to be some kind of paper trail and some way of going back and checking 5 years from now as to whether the property is still being used the same way and hasn't been converted to some other use by the same organization. I mean, you could, you know.
Do the 3607, 06 and 07, do they still require the 3-year,
They don't require it. They say you may do it for everything except government-owned properties. So you can do it if you want to, but it seems like most people don't do that except for the ones that the board does approve through the 3651.
okay, all right. So
But it is
church,
kind of a problem because, you know, going through our land book, you know, there are ones that have been on there for a long, long time, and, you know, churches come and go, so you really, you know, theoretically, if the property had been sold, it would have triggered somebody to, you know,
Re-examine that.
think is it still a church or not, but if it's not sold,
Yeah, I mean,
and
it seems
it's
to me
just
to,
sitting there, but it's not being actually actively used as a church, then it may, you know, ought to come out of that tax exempt category.
yeah, I mean, for example, at reassessment time, you know, which is a periodic event, you know, at a minimum, at a time like that, some rechecking on some of the, especially the automatic ones ought to be in order, just to.
How about when and this is one of them, rescue squad sells a piece of land? How is that caught that it goes back on the tax rolls?
Because when we get the deed, we see that it's sold to a
Change of ownership,
non-exempt entity,
true.
so we make
Okay,
it.
so that, you do catch it through,
Yes.
through the sale? Okay,
Exactly.
just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
The question, Tom, we in years past have heard all sorts of conversation about Dillon rule issues. In the 3651, there seems to be a list of property uses: religious, charitable, patriotic, historical, benevolent, cultural, and park or other playground. Is that meant to be a required list? In other words, if we're not checking at least one of those boxes, then we are not given authority by the state to exempt? Or is that illustrative? What's your feeling about that?
Well, I would say it's definitive because it doesn't use words like similar to or such as. It's,
Well, that was my reading of it. It seemed to say, it says that uses such property for.
right, religious charity, yeah, I mean, it doesn't say similar to or such as, you know, that seems to be a definitive list of the things that we can exempt.
And my point there is that even today, that it seems to me that we should, you know, when we get a request, that there should be some, and some of those are fairly broad, I get it.
Right.
But why religious had to be there since they're already exempted in a 3606, but, so that sort of confused me a little bit. But, all right. Have we done what we were gonna do tonight, which is sort of raise this topic and begin to ponder it.
Do we think we need to have some sort of a documentation process for it?
Yeah,
I would.
yeah, an application or
Yeah.
whatever.
Is that for any new ones, or are we gonna try to reach back and pick up existings, or I don't, can you generate a report? You did generate a report of the existing ones. Is that, I guess you don't do that other than as a special report. It's not a,
We're required to do it every year. It's to be published with the real estate book.
And there's a budget
Ah,
piece to
okay.
this too. Let me make a suggestion, perhaps, Glenn is not going to be here on the next board meeting and move this to, I think, one of the work sessions in June. How about if we came back with just an outline or a process, an application? Certainly, another issue is dealing with, prospectively, anybody coming in would be under this triennial review. You could give notice to everybody that's on the books now, that in 3 years, you'll be re-reviewed or something like that. But at least roughing out maybe a process for you all to react to, and then you all could get back into the move.
Yeah, I like that. I'm not sure Wood would agree to it, but we'll at least have something to work with in terms of saying, no, I don't wanna do this, or I wanna add this.
The wheel, fortunately for us on these applications, has been invented. Glenda and I have looked at some that we don't want to go, where Loudoun County is one that gets into asking for mission statements and some other things from nonprofits, but
I think we need to keep it brief and,
we were thinking a one-page or two-pager kind of approach, so.
yeah,
One page. Well,
One.
we may have choices of two one-pages, but
yeah.
how about if
the application should be shorter than this discussion has been.
Yes.
if we can come back, and I'll look at the commissioner back there, but we'll come back with something in a June work session for you all to jump back into.
One other quick, from your database, can you determine what year a particular property became exempt? Is that information in the record anywhere?
I can right now because we still have our old legacy system that I can access. So I can do that right now until the AS400 goes away. And then I won't be able to.
Now, you've produced these, with this memo, the summary list, the totals.
Right,
But do you have a complete list of everything that's exempt?
Yes.
yes, Renee gave me the land book, which basically is the list, and,
And how big is that? How big is that file?
well, actually, she only gave me, two of the categories, cause, I got focused on these ones that are locally approved. So I didn't go through the whole list of government properties, be they federal or state or local, but, we could definitely provide that.
I'm not sure I want to.
Didn't you provide us one that was 111 pages or
Yeah,
something?
you did.
Yeah.
Give us one.
Yeah, I think we have,
And the biggest
Seen
part
it
of those
before,
were
too.
local government properties,
Right.
like schools and
Right.
things like that.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, so you're gonna come back to us at some point with some additional things to consider.
Yeah, a process and
Right.
other pieces and parts.
All right,
All right.
I need a motion, so we adjourn.
Certainly
the-
wanna-
No, so moved.
All right,
Second. Too late.
Now, I just wanted to recognize Glenda and certainly Commissioner. Glenda
Yes, thank you.
jumped
Thank
into
you.
this and has become the subject matter expert, so.
all right, all in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Okay. You ready to move on, Allison? Okay. Let's call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Let's see. I'm aware of one addition to the agenda that deals with road name, public safety road designation and GIS maps. Were we putting that under, new business?
Yes, sir.
So I guess we'll have a 5A, public safety facility road name.
Motion to approve the agenda as modified.
Okay.
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, special presentations and appearances, service awards, Mr. David.
Yes, sir. We have two employees here to receive recognition for their service, county service award. I'll let Mr. White come down.
Okay.
All right, pleased to recognize Craig Johnson. He's the Assistant Chief of Fire and EMS. He's receiving his 15-year service award.
After 15 years, you're gonna get to move into a new building. You haven't moved yet.
I've moved a few times, but this next one's gonna be nice.
Mr. White, next I'd like to recognize Pam Walker with the 5-year service award. She's an E911 communications officer.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Yeah. just do it.
And you're gonna get to move too.
We had two other county employees that could not be here. Kenneth Licklider is going to receive a 5-year service award. He's Orange County Sheriff's Office Court Security. And Donald Hawkins, 15-year service award, and he's Orange County Sheriff's Office Court Security. And they'll receive the commemorative pin in the plaque.
Okay,
And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
all right. Okay, consent agenda?
Motion.
All right, have a motion
Second.
and a second, all right. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, it's unanimous. New business, public safety facility road name designation. And we have GIS maps.
Yes, sir.
Consider.
Mr. Chairman, just real briefly, as you know, at the building, there's a building going up that needs to be addressed. I think Mr. Hildebrand's done as much as he can without a formalized address with certain utility services and things. Discussion that I received in talking with board members is that there's going to be additional buildings at some point in the county's future out there. So having that road, carry its own name will allow addresses to be assigned off of it versus having just one address on Bloomsbury Road. So I bring that to you tonight with the hope and request that you all could come up with some name. That we're prepared to go ahead and issue the numbered address, just need the name for that road segment. And I had Mr. Whip put this together just to give you a lay of the land out there as far as existing street names and such.
I would just float the name of Government Center Drive.
I like that.
Couldn't be put in front of the runway with the road, we call it out of the way.
There you go. There you go. The only reason being, it's not building specific, and it does plan for future government development out there.
Yeah. So,
Is that a motion?
Are we to that point? If so, yes.
I'll second it.
Government Center Drive, okay. I have a motion and a second. Any further?
It's not the most imaginative name I ever came across.
This is very true. I'm a
We
simple-minded
can
individual.
always
I
rename it.
take it you thought this up on your own.
Actually, we came up with a different name, and we've reconsidered.
Mr. Goodwin just made a point that I think is certainly appropriate.
Yeah, we can change the name at any point in time.
Yeah.
And only would affect us, so it's not like we're affecting.
Other people.
I guess the only question I would have is, do we specify that it's Orange County in any way? I mean, you can't add Orange County in front
You
because you
make the
get too
sign
long.
really
but-
big.
Right. And believe with the orange mailing address, that would fairly well
Probably.
cover.
Oh, we're gonna give it a mailing address?
Well, that would be the,
I certainly, I don't have a better one, and I'm not opposed to that, so. Any further discussion? Anybody want to?
We'll try to give it to Kurt with Hillebrand Highway, but y'all.
Yeah, he doesn't want it. All right, all in favor?
Want that on the record, so. My going away gift.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, it's unanimous, we have a name.
Good.
Thank
Thank you, gentlemen.
Now, we have to decide how we're gonna spell center. CNTER or CNTRE.
Oh, I thought it was SINNER. I thought that's what you told me.
I prefer RE.
Be a little classy.
Yeah, I like Ari. All right. No old business, department director.
The whole way or just UVT?
I'll tell you what, on that one, I will defer to the 911 addressing individual.
That's right. Okay. All right, department director, constitutional officer report, MOU with Madison regarding legal assistance. Ms. Bradley. We have that information in our packets.
This is an issue that was discussed a little bit at budget time, but because we've never had a formal agreement about funding this legal assistant position for the judges, Brian thought it would be a good idea to work with Madison to sort of put this in writing. So Tom drafted this MOU, and Madison County has already approved it. But the purpose of the MOU is to just lay out the agreed-upon funding formula for the judge's legal assistant. She has worked in Orange County at one time when it was the 3 counties together sharing one judge. A few years ago, I think it was July of 13, she went to be a direct employee in Greene County. But now she'll be coming back to Orange County because Judge Durer is only going to be serving Orange and Madison. So our funding split would be 40% to Madison, 60% to Orange. So it is an increase in the cost to Orange, but we felt like it was a fair split,
What were we
considering
splitting
the
before?
workload.
Was it
A third, a third, a
third?
third. Was an even split before. And this is, Judge Durer had estimated kind of the caseload being this particular split.
Just curiosity, if it was an even split before, why isn't it an even split now? I don't understand going from.
I really don't think the caseload was even before. I'm not sure where that, or how long it had been. As long as I've been here, which is since 2011, it had been split in thirds, but
It was not based on caseload distribution.
I don't see how it could have been, because
Well, it depends if you
So we
go back
probably lucked
far
out.
enough in time. Orange, Green, and Madison looked a lot alike.
Yeah, probably at the time, yeah.
Well, Orange has always had a lot more people though, so probably it's,
They said we probably lucked out for a few years.
yeah. That's our problem, we're just lucky.
I noticed that the agreement, while it doesn't contain any provision to revisit this on a, every 3-year basis or anything like that, there is a cancellation provision with simply with 60 days notice. That was the only thing that this thing's, but for cancellation becomes perpetual. And that's not necessarily bad, but I just want to point that out, is that's the terms of the agreement, so. I don't think we want to revisit it every year as a budget item. I'm not suggesting that at all. But, and maybe, the only likely occurrence for revisiting it would be basically a cancellation, so.
Well, the way it really works in the real world is we just, if at some point we renegotiate, everybody knows the cancellation clause is in there, and you just, that's the segue into a renegotiated agreement.
Right, so I mean, I think I feel
So do-
comfortable with it. It's
Do we
just-
need a motion on this? Yes. So moved.
I think, yep,
Second.
okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Thank you,
Unanimous. Thank you. All right. County Attorney's report,
No report, Mr. Chairman.
okay. County Administrator's report.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I just have two items for you tonight. As you know, at the conclusion of every year's General Assembly, I bring back to you VACO's information on what happened, and I've done so again this year. I've also handed out something that came in, when was this? Monday from VACO concerning machinery and tool tax on utility scale solar installations. This was handed out under separate cover. It looks like this. I would say this is an interesting read. It appears that a small group of Southside County, Prince Edward, I think Halifax, met with some solar provider companies, and there was an admission by the solar companies that generally local governments are losing out a big bunch of revenue because the subsidy that is baked into the state legislation exempts some of these larger scale solar projects. And that everybody agreed to kind of work together to see if there was a way to offset this lost revenue for local governments. Because I think the solar companies are starting to see the writing on the wall where local acceptance of these larger projects is becoming harder because of pushback from adjoining property owners and others. And local governments are having to weigh that with, there really isn't any much incentive into them from either a tax revenue, a job creation, kind of those traditional economic development metrics. And so I think the solar industry is starting to see the writing on the wall that they're not gonna get these things approved as readily as they once did. So, my hope is that there comes out of it where we can start at least realizing some larger revenue streams off of these, if, they're in the right place at the right time type of thing. Other than that, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I had nothing else.
Okay. All right.
The next item I had is, as you know, each quarter I come with generally an update of how we're doing on the strategic priorities. I'm not gonna go through each one of them. I would point to the digital citizen priority. I think with having Lewis now on board, I'll call that Lewis on the digital citizen, certainly Stephanie's efforts from kind of coordinating the digital citizen, and then certainly what Jim Whip, you could see what really happened today, this GIS tool survey for the broadband was exactly, at least my personal opinion, exactly what the board's expectation was on digital citizen, that we were able to take the capacity and the talent that we have, quickly roll out something that then engages our citizens, and I like to see us continue to build on that going forward. I know Larry's not here as well, but Larry certainly plays a big role in this as well, so.
Okay. All right. Board comment. Any board comment? Anyone? We have a request from the Director of the Chamber of Commerce to support their ag initiative. And so at some point, I'd like to have a conversation about how we would like to do that. There's been suggested that possibly we do a specific resolution of support. This is something that the state, we had a briefing about it a couple of months back. The state has been very supportive of of the initiative, and I think we should consider the manner in which we would like to express support from this board. I mention it now because the goal is whatever we do, it would to be tied in with the county fair coming up a little bit later. So while we have a little bit of time to consider it, it is a request that we have that we need to respond to. So just wanted to put that on the table, and I'm looking for a date here if I can find one. My computer doesn't like anything I'm doing tonight, so.
You're looking for a resolution?
Yeah, I think her preferred response is in the form of a resolution from the board to designate, say, the week of the county fair to be Ag Week in Orange County, or, something like that, so.
When is the
I mean, I think we should designate it Beautiful Weather Week in
That would be a nice
in hopes that that will mitigate against what usually seems to happen.
Yeah, if you think it would help, so, I mean, this, Tammy Collins is sort of leading this effort, and I think she's just looking to pull together the community around this initiative, and so.
And when is the fair? Is it June?
Yeah, they were talking about moving the date, because of the animals and the heat and stuff, but I don't know if they actually did.
It's like June 21st, 22nd.
Yeah, okay,
Okay.
so into June,
So we have
another meeting
Another
or
meeting,
two
yeah.
to decide this.
I would,
And if you like, we can prepare something and have it available for review, whatever. I'm really just looking for some input about what you think about it.
I'm not sure what else we could do other than a resolution, and that give a little more visibility of the fact that it's not just Fair Week. This is agricultural and focus on that.
Okay.
So,
Does
yeah, I
that sound
guess
all right to everybody?
come up with a draft.
Okay, all right. All right. Any other board comment? Okay. Any question on the information items? Any appointments to,
Yes,
okay,
yeah, I'd like to appoint Simon Gray for another term at the Germanic Community College Board.
okay, that's a terrific appointment, I think. Yes, indeed. Any others? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right,
We'll have to be appointing a new planning commission
right.
representative.
And I have a couple appointments that I'm hoping to do next meeting, as a matter of fact, so. All right, any questions on the calendar items? All right, we do have 2 public hearings tonight, so, Mr. County Attorney, if you read the motion.
All right, whereas the Board of Supervisors of Orange County desires to discuss in closed meeting the following matters: discussion, consideration, assignment, and performance of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of the public body and community development area. Discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for public purpose, where discussion in open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body. Consultation with legal counsel pertaining to actual or probable litigation, where such consultation in open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body concerning trash and debris violation. Consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel concerning fire, ENS, and historic designation. And whereas pursuant to sections 2.2, 37, 11A1, A3, A7, and A8 of the Code of Virginia, such discussions may occur in closed meeting. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Supervisors of Orange County does hereby authorize discussion of aforestated matters in closed meeting. Need that as a motion.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 We're in closed.
Members of the board, to the best of your knowledge, were the only matters discussed in the closed meeting. public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements, and that only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting. Mr. Creighton,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
All right.
Mr. Crozier,
Aye.
Mr. Goodwin,
Aye.
and Mr. White.
Aye.
5-0.
Okay. All right. Next item on our agenda, it's time for public comment. I'll open the public comment period. Anyone signed up?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman, not for public comment.
Okay. We'll close the public comment period. So next we have public hearing on the proposed secondary six-year plan. We have copies of that in our packet. And we've discussed it over the past several meetings. Allison, you have any comments you want to make?
I don't have anything additional since our work session. I just want to note that, the draft plan that's included in your packet, along with the resolution for adoption, is, the draft that was presented during our work session. It does not contain any new projects, for the coming fiscal year, but the projected funding allocations that were reviewed, by VDOT staff at our work session, are proposed to be reallocated, among the project line items that you already have in the project. So it's prepared for your consideration and adoption tonight via the resolution that we've enclosed, after you open the public comment for, or the public hearing for public comment. The last, kind of step in our annual process will be for you to review your auxiliary list. I think over the last year, since you looked at your auxiliary list last May, there have been a number of additional roads that we've had VDOT look at and do estimates and, kind of study them for secondary system acceptance. So what I plan to do over the coming weeks is work with VDOT staff to update that, present it to you at one of your meetings in June, and that will kind of close out our annual process.
Okay.
Do you want me or, a member of our VDOT team here to review the projects that are currently in the plan?
Anybody have any questions about the current plan or the projects and the like? I have actually a general question, Alan. Yes,
sir.
We have our Region 7, and maybe the combined 7 and 8 meeting is coming up before, 7 is coming up, I guess, next month. And in those meetings, there'll be discussions of shared issues among the localities in the region. And invariably, one of the ones that comes up is funding for secondary road matters. Is there, from a VDOT perspective, are there long-term plans that, for improving the funding situation? Because as we've discussed with you many times, the number of roads that could be brought into the system or that could be upgraded and the like far exceed the numbers that we have here in front of us for the six-year plan. And I want to use the opportunity of this discussion tonight in the public hearing to sort of, I believe, I can almost guarantee you that this topic will come up in the Region 7 discussion as one of the priorities. If I'm there, I can assure you 100% that it will come up again. But I also recognize that no one seems to have a solution. We can identify it as an issue, and we can request that it get some legislative attention and all these kind of things. But my concern is that the difference between the need and the levels of funding that have available to you is a large enough gap that it's gonna take a different approach almost. And so, I mean, I think you have the willingness to do more if you had more money. I don't think the problem rests at that level of concern, but help me understand where we might be helpful in our either local or Region 7-like discussions to help be more effective at communicating the magnitude of the problem. Let me say it that way. I don't mean to put you on the spot, so if you have some thoughts you want to provide us later, that's fine. This is me having an opportunity to vent, if you hadn't noticed.
And
And I think I have other vents.
yeah, to piggyback onto that, it is a major priority of the VACO Transportation Committee. Your colleagues that attend the VACO meetings hear it every single time from us, and unfortunately, the answer is always the same thing: look at the legislators. So, we know we need to look at the legislators, but like Mr. White said, what else can we do to rattle a cage, to shake out a few more pennies somewhere?
Well,
Like I said, you don't have to. We'll turn the mic up if you would like, but
every opportunity that the communities that we serve have to bear influence on those that make the decisions that provide us funds for secondary roads, VDOT is very thankful.
that's a good answer.
That is a wonderful answer.
Well, thank you.
That is, I almost want to stand and applaud.
Within the communities that we serve, especially when Daryl Roach, our program manager, is with me this evening. Daryl Shiflett, sorry. Daryl Roach just retired. When we do go through for the communities that we serve, the secondary 6-year plans, we're thankful for the funding that Orange County gets. One of our communities gets $14,000 a year for unpaved road funds. And to be able to build sufficient revenue to generate a project is very difficult. That's a 20-year cycle to get $280,000 to build a project. So every opportunity that our communities have to generate awareness about the needs, our secondary pavement condition that we hear a lot of complaints about, the potholes, chip sealing versus hot mix asphalt, that too is really a condition of funding.
Interesting you should mention that.
The more that we have, it's a very difficult decision that we have to make every year, trying to prioritize within the monies that we get just to resurface. And it's triage, and it's day after day after day. So
I've got a lot of constituents right now that are very unhappy with I don't even know what the process is called, but I guess it's chip and tar or something. You end up with, 607, 657, 609. 609 looks like it was done a little bit better. I'm not sure what that's about, but, yeah, a lot of people, I know this is not what we're doing right now, but yeah, a lot of people are scratching their head and very unhappy with that, how that turned out. I don't know if it was done improperly or whether that's just the way it's supposed to be, but a lot of loose gravel left on top of the roadway. One of your loose gravel signs was murdered up at the top of the hill there, so you're gonna have to put that in the budget for next year, replace that sign.
I mean,
They'll
and
come through and sweep that.
maybe that's a topic that a Region 7 should address is
They
the,
come through and sweep it, you said?
They will. They leave the excess aggregate there to prevent cars from tracking liquid asphalt that hasn't cured up onto their
How long do they
vehicles.
wait before they sweep it?
They should wait 2 to 3 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Depends on the weather. If it's hotter, they'll wait longer, but they should wait at least 3 weeks before they come back through and sweep.
Okay.
Just so you know, I don't want you to get your hopes up too much. Even when they come through and sweep, if they're using a VDOT truck rather than a street sweeper, you will find that it's off the center of the road. And that's it. So, yeah, so don't get your hopes up too high, Mr. Johnson.
well, again, my purpose was you look at these numbers, and then the projects, and, we're talking about, many projects getting, funding at the very end of the 6-year plan, if at all. A lot of them not at all, so, it's a challenge.
But through the year, I have been very appreciative of your creative ways of moving funds from project to project to get as much done as you're getting done, so.
Yeah, if we didn't have you, we would be in a whole lot worse shape than
Yeah,
what
so
we're
I
in.
mean,
We'd be in a worse mood too.
Yes, I would.
Greg
Ask
Banks
Mr.
and Daryl
Nesbitt.
Shiflett, they really do help us try to navigate through the funds and how to allocate them across the plans that we have for. So we've got a great team focused on that.
Yeah, I don't think
And
there's any
leverage
doubt.
every penny.
We're getting a lot of results for the little amount of money that we have. It's just that the scale of the problem is, you know, doesn't match up with
If
the
we
money.
had the money that we need, the safety improvements that we could make, the road conditions we would have, the bridges we could improve, it is a daily struggle, and it's not just the Department of Transportation that's faced with that.
Yeah.
But
Okay. All right, sorry to do that to you. Do you have anything you'd like to contribute as far as the 6-year plan? While you're up there, do you, Dan?
Any questions you'd like to ask us?
No, sir. If you have any questions about the plan, we did, Jonathan Rumbaugh went through the entire plan and began to look at, based on our strategy over the last 2 years. Initially in 2017, we had a great year, and we used our own state forces to do a lot of the work. In 2018, we had a lot of rain, and now we're behind schedule. So we're leveraging hired equipment, which is more expensive, to help us get back on schedule. And we've adjusted the estimates accordingly so that we can continue to produce projects. We have a good year and have good weather. Our estimates will be low. We'll still use state forces, and those funds will then waterfall to the next project in line. And then we'll get to 602. 602 is next after 603.
Right.
West Wind Drive to the west.
Well, yeah, hopefully this 6-year plan is a worst-case scenario, because you have been successful at improving upon the plan year after year, and we recognize and appreciate that.
Well, the
just need to
project,
pray for less rain, maybe that'll help.
yeah, that's what we all are. It was a beautiful day today, so
Yeah,
out there making hay.
all right. Okay. Any other questions, Val?
Thank you.
Just one final question. The chip and tar that's been done on the roads, has that been state forces or an outside contractor?
That's an outside contract.
Okay, I thought so, but I wasn't sure. Okay,
It
thank
is.
you.
Okay,
Thank you, gentlemen.
all right, thank you. All right,
Yes, sir.
let's open the public hearing. Anyone signed up to speak for this public hearing?
No, sir, not for this public hearing.
Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Okay, gentlemen, any questions, motions, discussions, otherwise? Was that a motion you made?
I didn't make the motion, because most of these are concern you guys, and I figured that you'd want to make the motion.
Okay, I'll make the motion
All right,
to approve.
I have a motion to approve the 6-year plan, and I have a second. Any further discussion?
Just the one comment, just very, very happy to have Alan as our resident administrator.
That's great.
Realize we have the financial, but he comes out, he meets not only myself, but developers and other people to try to come up with solutions, which is something that did not happen in the past.
And he follows up and responds to emails.
Yes, absolutely, so, yeah, there's,
You've been very good about that.
no, just, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Thank you. Okay, move along to public hearing number 2, which is rezoning 1902. Anyone,
I think Sandra,
Sandra, you gonna give us a little introduction to this one, or, okay? Come on up.
Good evening. This is an application to rezone 28.45 acres located off Old Gordonsville Road, adjacent to the Woodcrest subdivision, between the subdivision and the railroad right-of-way. Rezone from industrial to agricultural for the purpose of, the stated purpose of constructing a residence and the potential keeping of animals. The Planning Commission is recommending approval of the application as presented. At the Planning Commission's hearing, there was no public comment aside from the applicant presenting the application for their consideration. An email did come our way in opposition to the rezoning, and I believe you have that in your agenda package.
We do, okay. iPad, and now I have a paper copy, and I can't find everything. There was, just as a matter of correcting the record, there was under the analysis and review of the impacts, there refers there to property on Walnut Run and being zone R1 and a few things like that. You might want to go in and find those, and, because it looked like it had been,
Oh, a cut and paste area.
yeah,
So I'm sorry,
and
okay,
I just,
didn't-
I saw it, I assumed that's what it was, but just, as an opportunity to correct the record, you might want to, notice that and put something in the file about that, so.
Okay, so a reference to Walnut Run, you said.
Yeah,
Okay. All right, I'll,
it's under the analysis and review of impacts section of, on page 2 of 3 of the, yeah, and it refers to Rhodesville Village to start out with, and this is not. I have,
okay, well, I will look and make the correction. I'm not seeing it right now as I'm glancing.
let me hand you a piece of paper, just that you can keep, just to give you I don't want to send you chasing a rabbit hole.
Okay, thank you.
There's just a few cut and paste errors that need to be cleaned up there, just to fix it. Okay, any questions of Sandra? Okay. Anyone here from the applicant to
Yes, sir.
talk to us?
Mr.
Okay. Come forward. Good. Give us your name and address and the like.
No problem. Drew Taylor. I work for Wiley Real Estate, and I represent the bonds because it's an estate property. Carolyn lives in Clarksville, and Tom lives in Georgia, so they could not be here tonight. I live at 6086 Ridge Road in Somerset, Virginia, the lovely 609 neighborhood that's just been tarred and gravelled. Mark, you need more traffic, because the more traffic you have, the gravel is in the ditch right now on 609. So, anyway, this property, I don't know if any of the information that was presented at the Planning Commission meeting conveys to you all or not. If not, there were a couple of things, concerns regarding the rezoning of this property going to ag. One of the concerns, and I believe probably the email that Sandra's referring to, is that the neighbors were concerned that the livestock might be a nuisance to them, even though it's adjacent to an 80-some acre cattle farm already. And this is not gonna be a high-intensity ag operation. This is to keep a few animals. If the children wanna have a 4-H project or something like that, there was kinda no need to have a SUP in order to keep a steer or heifer or something like that. Also, another concern that had been brought up was the buffer between the subdivision and this parcel. I don't know how many of you all have been able to visit this property. Some on the planning commission had. The minimum buffer is 135 feet from the subdivision, and the max is like over 600. And I have a piece of paper here that I can pass around that shows, the purple area here is all the buffer, because it's all wetland, and I don't think you wanna build anything there. I don't think the county's gonna approve that you build anything there, so. There's that, so that just gives you, and it gives you an overview too. You can see on page 3 where the trees are, that there's basically plenty of protection between the subdivision and here. And like I say, it's across the railroad track from the agricultural station. It's adjacent to a cattle farm already, and it's across from some of the Taylor land, which they tell me is the largest contiguous farm in the state of Virginia. I don't have information to,
That would have come from District 1 representative on the planning commission.
it came from Mr. Capel.
District 1 is always at the forefront.
Yes. always.
And I do have some pictures that I'm happy to pass around too, so you can, if you would like to see them, that just show that basically one of the pictures is the entrance to the property. You know, it's zoned industrial, obviously that was left from the seventies, cause it's just original zoning along the railroad track. And if you were to rezone it to industrial, I don't know how you could use, if you were to use it as an industrial property, I don't know how you could use it, because the decel lane would probably take the yards of the 3 neighbors on the road. So anyway. So that's where we are.
Okay.
And like I say, I do have pictures, if you would like to see them, if you would not. Basically, it's been farmed for the last, I mean, forever, since the seventies. It's in hay right now. It's been planted in hay.
And I think you mentioned this, but as I look back, this did look like part of the original zoning when the county first adopted a zoning ordinance in the
Yes, sir.
late sixties
That's
and early
correct, and
seventies.
it's a residue parcel off of the subdivision that was left and never developed and never planned to be developed, from what I can gather of the history of the property.
Right, okay. All right, any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, what is the reason for this to come to us? Why is it now a desire to rezone this property after it's been zoned the way it has, and these people have owned it for approximately 20 years?
Yes, sir, that's correct. They inherited it from their family members.
Great.
They tried to sell it, it's been on the market as an industrial property. We had minimal interest in the beginning because the railroad company called and said, oh, maybe we can help market your property, maybe we can get a rail stop, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't think that's gonna happen, but okay. So, I went back to him and I said, this parcel is with 2 other parcels that needs to be sold to settle the estate. And I said to the bonds, or to Tom, I said, Tom, it looks like to me that we need to downzone this because it needs to be used as a farm property, as an agricultural property. You need to build a residence on it, build a barn, keep your hunting horses, keep a few cattle, make some hay. It's not gonna be an industrial property. When somebody comes to you, like I say, Mr. Herlock at VDOT's gonna say the decel lane's gonna take the neighbor's 3 yards. Getting in and out is gonna be a bit of an issue. And then I think it would be more of a nuisance to the subdivision.
So it's marketing for sale.
Exactly.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll open the public hearing. Anyone signed up to speak?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Close the public hearing. Okay, gentlemen. Any discussion or thoughts?
Yes, discussion.
Okay,
This is absolutely legacy zoning. There's no question about it. It was done back when they were throwing darts.
yeah, they saw a railroad and said industrial.
Right, at which is part of my concern is absolutely this one property is not necessarily, and probably is not a good industrial site. However, it is along a group of industrial properties that combined, you absolutely could use a railroad siding and you would have the appropriate access. With that being said, that all makes perfectly good sense to me, until we get to the cattle farm next door. that's
Which is
been a
also
cattle-
zoned.
Which is also zoned industrial and has been a cattle farm forever. The other thing that concerns me, and this came from the planning commission, we've had 2 other properties within the past, I believe, 12 months, that bordered on the town limits. One just south of town on Route 20, one just north of town on Route 20. And the planning commission was a little rough on the people. and only allowed partial usage of their property for ag use, animal keeping and stuff. And part of their basis was, it is on the town boundary. Well, this came through the planning commission, and it was one of the quickest approvals by the commission I've seen in a long time. There was no concern or any care given whatsoever to the fact that it was on the town boundary, or that it is industrial, that you have the Central Virginia Regional Jail, and you do have the Virginia Tech Research Center, which I'm not sure how much life it has left in it at its current location. Ultimately, we probably need to look at this entire area to appropriately zone it. It gives me a little bit of concern that it went through the planning commission without the thought that they'd used on two other properties, and also dismissing the railroad as any viable use there. And that's just my comments on it.
Well, it's interesting, because as Mr. Crozier speaks, I'm looking at the zoning map here, and the property that we're talking about immediately to the south, which is an operating farm, it appears to be part of it's industrial, part of it is R1, and part of it's R2.
There are more cows on
And it's
one
being
part
used,
than the other.
it's being used for agricultural uses. So, yeah, I think probably you're right, we do have some things we could clean up there.
It just,
I understand what you're saying, I think for me, the way I'm looking at this is, I've always strongly believed in property rights, and that people need wide latitude in what they can do with their property. And that's usually applied toward a more intensive use. I think it also needs to apply the other way, which is a less intensive use. And I think just given the fact that, this is a smorgasbord of use here. I mean, there's the towns there, you've got industrial uses, you've got R2, you've got R1, you've got the agricultural, on the other side of the road, and you've got the agricultural park, and of course, right down the road, you got the co-op on the other side of the railroad track, so it's a little bit of everything.
absolutely.
And I don't think we're gonna upset any apple carts to turn this back to agricultural, whence it was, at least prior to 1968, maybe prior to 1948. 48 was actually when the very first zoning ordinance was passed. And at that time, there was some, I actually think it may have happened in 48, because what they did was they said anything within a certain distance of the town got more intensive zoning. It was like within a mile of the town, then it got, of course, the town at that time was smaller limits, but it still would have been within a mile or so of the town.
The other thing that concerns me is this is, I believe, the third property rezoning that we've had in recent time that came about because of a sale or a pending sale. It concerns me that we are getting more of these. So, well, if we wanna sell the property, we're going to now customize it. It's been like this all along and it was fine, but now we need to customize it to sell it. These are just points, not specifically on this, but just in general, I think we need to, look at more of the appropriately zoning that we have done both in the Mine Run and Rhodesville areas. And once we've looked at that, come up with some more standardized considerations for changing the zoning. I don't wanna call it up zoning, down zoning, rezone, but when we deal with the zoning issues.
Yeah, I think one of the issues could actually be our zoning ordinance itself. I mean, if you look at the things that are permitted uses inside the industrial zoning, you can't build a house.
Right.
You can't, if you had a house, you couldn't put a deck on it. if you had a house, you couldn't build a garage beside it. I mean, and so it, for a property like this, the industrial designation in particular, and this was the case of at least some of the properties in Mine Run, as you recall, it had very little marketability as an industrial parcel, but because of the zoning, you couldn't use it for
Anything else.
any other common use, and so it was that box that we found ourselves in, and I'm not so sure that this isn't the same box, it's just, this property's a little bit bigger than the
Well, a
ones
lot
we
of
dealt
that
with
though
there.
had prior use.
Some of it did have prior use down there, right?
Well, I mean, one of the problems we're certainly up against is, you know, the first ordinance was in 48, and that's 71 years that this board has been fixing this problem. So that certainly explains why we have such a mess on our hands now. And we're not gonna fix it in any one given day or year, and we kinda have to deal with these as we come upon them. And if this were ringed by R1, R2, R3, where people had a reasonable expectation that they weren't gonna have to put up with animals, or if it were ringed by industrial uses, then that would be different. But, you know, you've got
Yeah, you got
a little bit of
cows
everything
next
there.
door.
Right.
That's,
You could pretty much justify any zoning there and just, I mean, any zoning we're likely to consider. And there's certainly things you could point to and say, this fits in because there's already something there like that.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, if I could, the conversation about the state of the ordinance and it being there for many years and God love it, it's been a good ordinance. I think as time goes on, Sandra and I, in our application of the ordinance with me serving as zoning administrator, certainly getting the county attorney and assistant county attorney, there are some things in here that are just really difficult for us to, why is it this way? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and so.
Really?
Shockingly.
I've never run
So,
across that myself.
I think the board, planning commission, certainly the landowners in the county would be well served, not this year, but at some point in the reasonable near term, where we look at this, updating this ordinance, much like we did with the subdivision ordinance. Not a complete rewrite, but just going in and getting things up into maybe modern language and more use-based rather than this real strict, this is the only thing that can go in there. The other plug I would put in is I think there's a lot of opportunity nowadays to do conditional zoning that allows expectations on the owner's part, but also joining property owners of what exactly is going to go on a piece of property rather than an open-ended zoning. So I'll stop there, but that's my plug.
Okay. Any other comments or topics you want to discuss?
My biggest concern is still that it is on the town border. And although there's a farm there, if you go just up the road, there's an industrial park. And if you come back down just on the opposite side of the railroad tracks, we have a lot of industry there. One of the largest industries that is no longer operational, I'm right across the street from them. My worry's always been that if you get to the town border and you talk about expansion of the town, if Ms. Taylor doesn't own it, then somebody else has taken it and put it in easement and blocked the town from growing. And although we don't want the town to become New York City, which never will, keeping things from growing means they're dying. And so I have difficulty in trying to do this particular thing because although it might meet a need for the immediate future, I don't know that it's the correct need for the county as a whole to lock ourselves out of something that's zoned this way until we took a comprehensive look at what we want to do with everything rather than picking it apart one by one. So similar to what we did in Mine Run and the other area, I think we ought to take a comprehensive look at it and decide if we want to down zone it or give it a modified zoning, similar to what we're doing with GWAP, so that we can maybe allow something where they can build a house and have a cow
but still maintain the ability that should somebody want the parcel, that they can come in and start a company. So given my opinion, I would not vote for this tonight. Possibly could change my mind if we did a comprehensive review and decided on some way forward for everything along this particular corridor.
I guess, is there a way in our, given our current ordinances, that either through an SUP or a special exception, maybe this is a question to you, Tom, as much as anybody, that we could allow this to have the low-intensity use that we're hearing they were contemplating, which is basically a residence and a few farm animals? Is there any way to, without completely upsetting the intentions of the industrial zoning, is there a way to permit a use like that that's not so unwieldy that it's, foolish? That comes to your mind? I was about to check some language, but I didn't get there yet, so.
Well, I mean, we could definitely add some SUP use in an industrial zoning for farm/residential.
Yeah, I think that's wagging the wrong end of the dog, though, because you're adding in special use for industrial zoning, which means then we're gonna.
Down zone with a special use.
Right, I agree, it's backwards from what you would ordinarily, the way you'd ordinarily treat
Well, I
it.
mean, you're opening up another one of Pandora's boxes by doing that, because you're then allowing every industrial piece of land to
Potentially.
to ask for an SUP.
But the very nature of an SUP is it's discretionary, so, nobody has a right to an SUP. And
No, but there's a reason why it's left off of there currently, because we don't, as a general rule, we don't want residences in industrial zones.
Agreed. The problem is that we, years and years ago, apparently willy-nilly, I don't know, maybe there was some thought to it, rezoned all kinds of parcels to industrial.
Well, again, I think this was done, there was stuff that was done industrial and commercial that was near the town, because they properly thought that's, the fact of the matter is, we're here 70 years later, and, that piece of property is
It's
sitting
still
there, in farmland, essentially, and next door to it is another piece of property that's farmland.
All the way down to the fairgrounds. It's industrial all the way to the fairgrounds.
And in front of it, it's fairly dense residential.
And the property next door, the Harris property, that'll be interesting if somebody were to buy that for industrial use because of the R1 and R2 zoning, and that's exactly what General Shale got whacked at the Supreme Court for, was trying to use have an accessory use of industrial property coming across R1 or R2.
Well, and that property it appears has no access. If the zoning lines are at all accurate, the industrial part of that has no access at all to a state highway,
Yeah, it looks like it's,
from what I looked, when I saw it, so, it's.
and actually, I mean, this property we're talking about, the pipe stem is, at least according to this.
Goes through a
is
residential
zoned
district.
R2.
Right.
So would it help if I gave you a little more information?
You could ask some questions if you'd like and see if there's an answer out there.
Sure.
Because I think this is a difficult call. It's not a clear,
Exactly.
Yeah.
obvious thing, so.
No, just what did you have to offer in particular?
Just to let you know that the property is, like Drew mentioned, just to be used for residential. My son Eric here and his wife Tori just want to build a home there, close to work. You all know I own Pro Collision right across from the.
Well, and that's one of my concerns is people like you that have come in and built all along through there, and, there are opportunities with the railroad there, although, nothing's happened yet, that doesn't mean it won't. That was one of my concerns, is creating a block for progression of industry off the town, which is where it makes sense. So,
I guess as far as the rail, I don't know what that frontage is, but it looks to me like it's, for that property to have any rail access, it would have to convince
if you're
one or
gonna
more of
have,
the neighboring properties to.
you're gonna have to have multiple properties.
Based on our
to make-
recent,
Yes, and that's.
discussions in another realm, that is, I would say that's accurate. There's not enough frontage on the rail there for it.
No water and sewer over there, I don't think.
Not on that side of the railroad track, I don't think.
Well,
I don't know how far down it comes, but
where'd you tie into that line on,
To the jail,
on the jail? Is that tied to the front of the property or the back?
front. Well, it goes, down the middle, actually. I mean, across my property.
Well, I know, because you run across the front of mine,
Right.
and then, but for the jail, where does it reach there? On the back side of the jail property by the railroad, or?
I'm not positive on that, and I feel like it's towards the middle, but
Yeah, I don't know, because when it goes through, Ridgeview, how does it go through there?
in front of the building.
In front of the building? And it very well could be in the middle of the property then.
I believe it is too.
Okay,
It's been too long ago, I'm not positive either.
And again, if you go on follow the industrial down the railroad tracks, it really looks like none of that has access to, Old Wardensville Road. It's all blocked off by residential zoning.
I'm quite sure when they did all this, they didn't worry about it.
Well, it would be interesting to know when that R1 and R2 zoning was done, because I suspect that was done at a later date. I don't think they did that in 1948. That was something that was done later on because somebody wanted to build houses there.
that looks like it might have been subdivided off of this parcel
Right. I
itself
think,
at some
yeah,
point.
yeah, it's likely.
Well, I guess we have three possibilities. We can take no action and deal with this at some later time when we think we'd have more information or whatever. We can decide to, if somebody wants to make a motion, we can see how it fares. Or we keep talking about it.
That's the third option. Keep talking about it.
It's not midnight.
That's midnight, though.
We can go till midnight legally. Well,
Well, I make a motion that we approve it as presented.
okay. Is there a second? I'll second it for discussion purposes, as if we haven't discussed it enough.
Teal, how would this rezoning impact the town? How do you see that as potentially impacting the town?
Well, like I said, my concern is that over time, you find the town getting cut off. And I don't want to hem the town in, and that was my concern.
If that's agriculture, would that be hemming the town in?
No. But if it were to become a conservation easement, yes. And that would be my concern.
Well, they can bring conservation easement into town.
Yeah. Well, that's just it, the town is ringed by it.
So your concern is that someone in the future as agriculture may clamp that down as an agriculture, or as a conservation easement.
Well, I mean, I have no problem with people farming it, but if at some point you go, here's your entity, that's, a town that's not growing is dying. It's real simple math.
Okay, all right.
And that's my concern. Given I know who it is, I have a lot less concern because I know Dave. And, he's done anything but hinder the growth of the town of Orange. He's been very good for the town.
Teal, may I just add something?
No, we're,
Well, you know, I would just, I don't wanna get into it back and forth, but if you look at, you know, when the town did their last annexation, what did they do? They came right down the railroad track. They didn't annex anything, to the east of the railroad track. Now, they didn't do that because some of it had been, you know, they didn't do it probably because they thought that was a good natural border. And they actually followed that on up, you know, further into town. I just don't agree that this hinders the town or holds the town back. You've got residential property there, if at some point the town decides they wanna come out, Old Gordonsville Road, I just don't see how this, I don't see how this 28 acre parcel really has any major impact on that.
Well, I still have to raise a concern.
No, I hear you, but I'm just not,
And,
You're not feeling it.
well, I'm just seeing so many obstacles to this being ever used as industrial,
And I guess
beyond what it is right now.
Yeah, I guess that's my concern is that if you compare this to other properties that we know are around, this would be a challenge to do by itself. Now, if you could get the two properties on
you'd
the
have
other
to
side,
parlay it with
and
others.
I don't think that that's in the realm of possibility, at least on the one side. So I, you know, at this point, it probably, is not, taking a property with economic development potential, I'll say it that way, off the market realistically. It's just,
But
if this were the
yeah.
last piece left within a mile, then, and it had water and sewer running down Old Gordonsville, yeah, then maybe somebody would squeeze something in there, but there are a lot of difficulties there to deal with. I mean, I don't know how you're gonna get into the property off of Old Gordonsville
No.
without taking some kind of a extra property. I mean, that easement is what, is it 100 feet wide or something like, it was pretty wide, I know, but it's not enough to do, you know, much of a right in, right out kind of deal out of it, I don't think, so.
yeah, it appears to be probably 100
I
feet.
think that's what it is.
That's about it.
So,
Yeah.
and I absolutely believe in property rights, and I'm not against this. It seems like everything we've gotten in here in recent time have been interesting and challenging properties. And I applaud the real estate agent for thinking outside the box and coming to get it rezoned. And I can assure you, if the property to the south was not agriculture as it is, I would be much, much more inclined to not go with this. I have a concern, and I needed to have a good discussion on it.
Yeah. I also think the wetland area is no small consideration.
is
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is 100 foot, by the way.
Is it? Okay. All right. Anybody want to call the question? Or you want me to do it? You ready? Okay. Let's do a roll call.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Crozier,
Aye.
Mr. White,
Aye.
Mr. Goodwin,
Aye.
Mr. Frame.
All right.
Let me,
You didn't expect to be irrelevant, did you?
I was expecting to hear a nay in there somewhere.
well, let the record reflect that vote was a lot closer than that roll call, makes it sound like. 50 years from now, Mark, when you're doing the history of this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause we'll all be dead, so.
I think
Some of us
we
will
is
be.
the right word.
Yeah, some of us.
I think I would have preferred Jim's, a comprehensive solution for that, but that was not on the agenda tonight.
No,
Right.
and
I still think we need to look at it comprehensively.
Well,
I do
It
too.
doesn't-
I do too.
We need to look comprehensively at a lot of things. That's one of the problems.
We do.
Yeah.
And the zoning ordinance is, that's the granddaddy of them all.
We tried that once, remember?
Yeah,
How'd that work out?
I've tried it a couple times, yeah.
All right. There you have it. I need one more motion.
I move to adjourn.